The Pac-12 makes the first move. Welcome into the Voice of College Football as we host a special live stream. We appreciate your participation and being here as the Pac-12 has made its move just hours after the NCAA Division I Council votes to eliminate the requirements for division play. George Clancy, who has been out front about being forward-thinking and moving the Pac-12 into the next wave of college football and entertainment, has made a move to disband divisions in the Pac-12. We got Matt Simek on the line, as we typically do, from Trojans Wire. Get on over there to Trojans Wire. Check out Matt's work. Matt, it's good to see you. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great, and USC is doing great. Almost as great as the day Lincoln Riley was hired. I mean, this event, this development right here instantly boosts USC's Pac-12 championship odds by a lot, because USC was boxed in by the divisional format. If you lose at Salt Lake City against Utah, sorry, tough luck. You're probably on the outside looking in. And now that barrier gets removed, and USC's not playing Oregon during the regular season, during the 9-game Pac-12 schedule, not playing Washington, doesn't have very many tough road trips other than the Utah one. And again, the Oregon State game now becomes even bigger. I think if USC wins that Oregon State road game in Corvallis in week 4, you can pretty much punch the Trojans' ticket to Vegas for the Pac-12 title game. It won't matter whether they beat Utah or not in terms of qualifying for the Pac-12 championship game. Now, obviously for the college football playoff, of course, but just in terms of getting to the Pac-12 championship game, if USC manages to figure out Corvallis, there's no other really big road landmine for the Trojans to trip over. And an 8-1 Pac-12 record, very, very likely if they solve Oregon State. So again, USC now a clear favorite to play in the Pac-12 championship game. Whether USC wins that game, we don't know. But the Trojans should definitely be in that game in early December. So obviously fantastic news for the program. And we have, Mark, interestingly enough, continuity for Lincoln Riley, because he was in the Big 12 with the top 2 model. Now he goes right to the Pac-12, and he isn't going to have to wait a year. He goes right into a top 2 model. And viewers here on the Voice of College Football might be wondering, and we did talk about this a little bit in a recent show. John Wilner of the San Jose Mercury News and the Wilner Hotline, one of the best journalists covering all things Pac-12, he predicted that divisions would be eliminated as early as next year. We're not doing away with divisions in 2022. The schedule is already made up. You already have the divisional format. So there's still going to be a Pac-12 North and a Pac-12 South. But George Clancy and the conference leaders, they've said, just for our conference championship game, that format, that setup, that can be changed. So that was in a separate box. So people might be confused. You're going to have a divisional structure. That couldn't be undone. That couldn't be reversed. But they had discretion. They had leeway as soon as that NCAA Division I Council vote came down. They could change the format of the championship game. And so it was a natural and reasonable assumption to think that they would have the divisional format this year because of that divisional structure and schedule already in place. But Kliavkoff took that proactive step. Let's just get rid of it now, and let's just have our 2 best teams playing in early December in Las Vegas. And so, Mark, it just creates a 180-degree difference from Larry Scott. USC fans could not have hated Larry Scott any more than they did. Larry Scott never lifted a finger, and it was total amateur hour, a complete clown show in terms of doing all these little things, all these junior high school errors to prevent USC from being in the best possible position. Like, imagine the SEC putting Alabama on a Friday night in Pullman against Washington State the week after playing Texas on national television. That was the kind of stupidity USC and its fans had to deal with from Larry Scott that undercut the Trojans program, did not put the program in the best position to succeed and max out its resources. Imagine the Big Ten doing this with Ohio State. Imagine the Big 12 doing this with Oklahoma. So right here, George Kliavkoff has not been on the job for 12 months, and he has already shown now more than ever with this move right here He's doing everything possible to make USC succeed. He's giving USC every chance to be great. He's smoothing the path for USC. He realizes that USC football being great maximizes the Pac-12's college football playoff odds, but also just increases the Pac-12's visibility, because that Pac-12 championship game, it's usually on a Friday night, and so the league has put it on Friday night so that it doesn't get buried on conference championship Saturday. You might now see that game become a Saturday prime time game. Now too late for this year because the schedule's already made out, but I would bet, Mark, that you're going to see that game move to Saturday evening in future years because you're going to have USC and Lincoln Riley most likely in that game. But of course, the Merry Christmas style bonus for USC fans, they're not going to have to wait until 2023 to be in the Pac-12 title game. Probably now are going to be able to be in that game this year. It's just a tremendous moment for the program.
Probably still have to go out there and win the games. I just want to further clarify a point that you clarified, but I'm going to make the extended point that this is going to have to be well communicated by the Pac-12 throughout the season, because people that aren't locked into college football 12 months a year are going to look at division standings and see, we're Oregon fans. We won the North Division. Why aren't we going to the Pac-12 championship game? What's going on here? So that's going to have to be communicated consistently throughout the season, or at least at a point where they feel, okay, this is a real thing and most likely going to happen.
Yeah, and so the point of clarity there is that the division structure that you couldn't undo that at this point in time. Like, that would require a remaking of the schedule, and there was just never enough time for that. So you're just decoupling the division structure from the conference championship game structure. That's the simple message there. So the division schedule is going to be in place for this year. It's just a vehicle for scheduling, but in terms of advancing your teams to the championship game and then to the playoff or the Rose Bowl, whichever, that is the new change. So yeah, I mean, I would think that the conference office can be very clear about that. And I guess, on the Pac-12 website and other public communications, they will publish like a 1 through 12 standings list. One would think, and you can kind of put the division standings over here in the corner as an addendum.
There's no reason to have division standings anymore.
That's right. So they should be publishing 1 through 12 standings. I mean, I'm not breaking any stories here. Like that has not happened. They should, but that has not happened. But one would think that they will be out front in publishing 1 through 12 standings, not North.
That's a good point of clarification. And again, I understand that you're not making that declaration, but it only makes sense.
It ought to happen.
That the division formats only resulted in what the schedule is, but there's no reason to continue to report division standings.
That's right.
If they don't result in a conference championship game.
Yep.
So the point can be made, and I believe it to be true, certainly, that this provides a clear path for USC to advance to the conference championship game. It also could mean that they have a tougher opponent in the conference championship game than they would have otherwise. It just paves the way for them to get there much easier.
Yeah, let's dive right into that. And, we talked about this on a recent show, right? That USC could lose to Utah in the regularly scheduled game in October, but then get a second crack at the Utes in the conference championship game. Now, obviously, the devil's advocate position, the skeptical view, is that, if USC beats Utah in October, well, then you have to beat the Utes twice. So that's a hardship. Okay, I get it. That's true as far as it goes. But here's the other side. Either USC loses to Utah in Salt Lake City, but gets a rematch several weeks later in Las Vegas, and USC will have learned from that loss, ostensibly will have grown and developed from that loss. USC would enter a rematch, a hypothetical rematch against Utah, with revenge on its mind. Players who are behind in their development right now or in the early part of the season, they will be much more polished, fully developed players at the end of the season. So even if USC loses the first game to Utah, that sets up a revenge game and an improvement game. Like, we can fix everything we didn't do the first time in Salt Lake City. So that would be to USC's advantage. And then let's say USC does win in Salt Lake City in mid-October. So, okay, it's a hardship to play Utah a second time, and then Utah would have the revenge angle. Utah would have a little more hunger, because of its own desire to figure things out. But if USC beats Utah that first time, you're probably looking at a scenario in which USC is 11-1 going into the Pac-12 championship game as the 13th game of the season. And if Utah is really good, if Utah has only one loss or maybe just two losses, and USC is able to beat Utah a second time, that could punch the Trojans' ticket to the playoff because Utah is really darn good. So the thought process from George Kliavkoff is this increases the odds that the Pac-12 can send its champion to the playoff. Now, obviously, you have to have a 12-1 champion. You can't have a 2-loss champion. We know that. But if USC's at 1 loss and plays Utah, a 1-loss Utah instead of, let's say, 3-loss Oregon, well, USC has that ticket punching game. USC has the higher caliber of opponent that can then vault over a number 5 team into that number 4 seed, or at least fend off the number 5 team if USC already is number 4 going into conference championship weekend. And it would be the same for Utah. Like, if there are any Utah fans here, the same dynamics would apply. If Utah is playing a quality 1-loss USC team, or maybe even a 2-loss USC team, but highly ranked, and like that's a top 15 game on both sides, then that gives Utah more heft on its resume if it can beat the Trojans and be 12-1. The same dynamic applies. So just, the bottom line is it's all about maximizing playoff odds. George Kliavkoff gets it, and it's just a testament to his leadership that he immediately pushed this through instead of, waiting for 2023 and feeling constrained, feeling that, okay, we have this divisional schedule, so I guess we got to abide by it. No, he did not feel limited by that reality. He said, we have the liberty to change the format for our title game. We're going to do it right away. Leadership. My goodness. It's just this breath of fresh air. It's this big glass of cold water after being parched in the desert under Larry Scott.
So think about this, college football fans, not just for the Pac-12, but if this rolls out across the nation, we're going to see more conference championship games, to Matt's point, that, let's say, has a top 5 to 10 team in the nation, not taking on a fringe top 25 team that just happens to be the winner of the other division, but is taking on another top 10 to 15 team in the country in a conference championship game scenario. Also exciting for the Pac-12 is from the time that Washington stepped off the field after losing to Alabama 24-7 in the 2016 playoffs, the Pac-12 has been removed from the national landscape. Aside from Oregon upsetting Ohio State as a 2-touchdown underdog and giving the Pac-12 some life, and the only reason the Pac-12 was mentioned throughout the season last year was because Oregon did pull off that upset that kept the Pac-12 alive. But as soon as they got ambushed against Utah, back to the abyss for the Pac-12. Really, for the last meaningful time since the national championship game of 2014, the Pac-12 has some mojo, some life, some hope here, and it's an exciting thing. I think that this is really something that, again, to your point, George Kliavkoff just has gotten out in front of and shown that you can take ownership of a situation. And when is the last time we could have made this statement, Matt? The Pac-12 is the first one to do something. They are taking the leadership role. I don't know when the last time we could have stated that.
It's hard to wrap the mind around, but of course now we're in disbelief here in Pac-12 country for good reasons, not bad reasons. So it's very refreshing. One other point that needs to be made in all of this, as we look at this landscape that you've laid out, is that the thought process as when Lincoln Riley took over at USC was that Lincoln Riley is going to force everyone to be better. That's still true. But now this reform here by George Kliavkoff, this is going to force the rest of the Pac-12 to get better, because it's not as though you can win a weak division anymore and get into the Pac-12 championship game. And over the past 11 years of the Pac-12 era, since Utah and Colorado came into the conference, the Pac-10 became the Pac-12 in 2011. For most of those 11 years, you had a strong Pac-12 North and a weak Pac-12 South. Oregon and Stanford had their rivalry with Chip Kelly and Jim Harbaugh. Then you had Chris Peterson at Washington coming in. And so, those three programs, ruled the roost in the North. And they had very strong programs, especially in that 6-year period from 2011 through 2016. And the Pac-12 South, until last year with Utah, the Pac-12 South won only one of the first 10 Pac-12 championship games. The North was always dominant. So if you had this upcoming new model without division champions, just the two best teams in the conference, they would have been all North Pac-12 championship games on several different occasions. John Wilner pointed out that nearly half of the first 11 Pac-12 championship games would have changed in their composition if you had this format and not the division championship format. So, that means everyone in the conference has to be better. Like, you can't say, well, if we go 6-3 in the Pac-12, we can win the North and play USC or Utah in the Pac-12 championship game. That avenue's closed. That door is closed. You must be 7-2 to have a realistic chance of being in the Pac-12 championship game now. So wherever you are in the conference, whichever division, whichever part of the larger footprint from the Northwest down to the Southwest or the Rocky Mountains, you have to be good. And of course, people might not know this, but just to be clear about it, in the current 9-game schedule, you play 5 games in your own division, 4 games outside your division. So it's not as though it's a division heavy or region heavy schedule. It's pretty balanced throughout the conference. You have to make plane trips, throughout the footprint of the conference. So it's not as though you're just in your backyard. You really do have to play throughout the conference anyway. So that kind of goes hand in hand with this reform, that, you're not just playing in one pocket. I know that in the ACC, for instance, with only 8 conference games, some teams in that conference don't play each other for like 4 years. And that's why we've seen Wake Forest and North Carolina play quote unquote non-conference games a couple times.
Yeah.
So anyway, like if you're
6 years,
say, yeah.
It's a rotation of 6 teams. So it's 6 years.
That's right. So anyway, if you're like, let's say Washington State, you might have entered this season thinking, okay, Oregon has Bo Nix at quarterback. Maybe the Ducks struggle on offense. Maybe this is a Pac-12 North we can steal at 6-3 in the conference. Well, sorry, Cougars, you're going to have to be 7-2. And of course, now the real battle is now Oregon doesn't have to measure itself, or it can't measure itself, rather, against the rest of the North, the other 5 programs in its part of the conference. Oregon has to measure itself now even more directly, even more squarely against USC and Utah. Oregon's going to have to beat out one of those 2 teams to get to the Pac-12 championship game. So teams in the conference, they have to measure themselves not against a regional rival. They're going to have to measure themselves against the whole conference. And it's, how do we get to number 2 instead of just being in our division and hoping that division's a little weak? You can't do that. So it's not just Lincoln Riley who's going to make the Pac-12 better. This right here is going to force all Pac-12 programs to be better. Obviously great for the conference, obviously fostering a healthier culture of cutthroat competition.
So I've got one possible negative, and then before I mention that, an aside to history, and to go back to your point about the Stanford-Oregon series when it was red hot. They say styles make boxing matches. We were going through national championship seasons here at the Voice of College Football on a call-in show, and it brought me back to reviewing those national championship seasons. It was fascinating for about a 4-year period. The games themselves were fascinating to see Oregon with 240-pound offensive linemen sprinting around the field and all that space, and then Stanford lining up with splits that wide on the offensive line and just mashing. And they played ridiculously entertaining games. But the dumb luck of the situation was the winner of that game typically lost somewhere else, and they really needed the Pac-12 for the loser to typically win that game. And there was just a series of near misses
the
for
wrong
both
way.
of those.
It broke the wrong
it always
way.
broke the wrong way for the Pac-12. It's fascinating to go back and look at the scenarios and how it could have played out, specifically for the Pac-12 between those two schools. The one point I was going to make, and I would have to think this through to see if it really matters, would be the negative of having, let's say, a 9-0 Pac-12 number 1 seed and them clearly be the best team in the Pac-12, and then a glut of, let's say, 6-3 teams that tie for second. There's a tie-breaking system, somebody makes it, and that 6-3 team pulls off the upset in the Pac-12 championship game.
No doubt. And of course, anyone watching this program on the Voice of College Football who is a Big 12 fan, I mean, the Big 12 championship game, we know this has knocked out a lot of playoff contenders, BCS championship game contenders over the years. And there is always that possibility. But if you're the Pac-12 and you have usually been on the outside looking in, what are the odds, right? The odds are that you need this game as a catapult to get in. Like, you can't rely on just your conference season to be enough to make the argument against an SEC champion Alabama, against a Big Ten champion Ohio State. Like, you need this game. The Big 12, that's kind of different since Oklahoma, has the heft, has the stature, the reputation, got to the BCS championship game a number of times, including a few times in controversial situations. So you could say that USC with Lincoln Riley, maybe USC, is going to experience, some unfortunate moments in the Pac-12 championship game in the coming years. But if you are USC and you expect to be excellent and you expect to be great, you want this test. Like, you're not fearing this test. You're not fearing this 13th game and the pothole that it could potentially represent. It's, let's stamp our authority over the Pac-12. Let's punch our ticket to the playoff. So are there downsides? Are there risks? And as we said earlier, is there a downside in USC potentially needing to beat Utah twice to win the Pac-12, get to the Rose Bowl, get to the college football playoff? Yes. Like, that's true. We're not ignoring it. We're not pretending it's not there. But if you're USC, you want that stage. You want to be in the biggest game of the year. And, Clay Helton, I mean, he was there as an interim coach in the 2015 Pac-12 championship game, got blitzed by Stanford and Christian McCaffrey. But then as the head coach, as the big dog, and let's throw out 2020 because that was just a truncated season with no real value. He made the Pac-12 championship game as permanent head coach once, and that was in 2017 with Sam Darnold beating Stanford. So USC, given its reputation, resources, and stature to have played in the Pac-12 championship game as seldomly as it has, like, that's an embarrassment. So I think for the program and for the conference, USC getting to the Pac-12 championship game, having that opportunity, good for USC, good for the Pac-12. It's a win-win here, even with all the pitfalls we can imagine.
Again, Matt Simek here typically joins us on Tuesday afternoon at 4 Eastern, 1 Pacific for our USC live show. So please check us out on Tuesday at 1 Pacific time. So, Matt, do you think that this is a format that works well in the Pac-12 situation, but the other conferences should weigh their situations, or do you think that this is the way everybody should go?
So this is a nuanced position, and one thing about this Pac-12 format is that it's not taking the team with the two teams rather with the highest college football playoff rankings, and that is something that has been criticized, and it will continue to be criticized. Why aren't you using the playoff rankings as the measurement? It's interesting that we bring this up, Mark, because on one of our recent shows, we referenced the 2008 season, and we remember that 2008 season because of that three-way tie in the Big 12 South, where BCS ranking was the tiebreaker. And so I get it. Like if you are thinking about national championship game positioning or playoff positioning now in the playoff era, why not just use the measurement that is being used to get the top 4 teams into the playoff? Makes total sense. My view of 2008, like we've never talked about this, Mark, but literally you can get my view of it now. My view of these kinds of things is a conference championship is a local or regional dispute. It's not based on your 12-game schedule. It's based on how you performed within the conference. So for me, this is just my view. I totally respect the view that it should be the playoff rankings and the national metric. I get it. I understand it. It makes complete sense. But for my view, if you are breaking a tie or if you are deciding a dispute within your conference, it should be about conference play, conference results. And that's why I really like the Pac-12's format. It's about how well you did in the conference. It's about your record within the conference. So that means the 2 best teams in that 9-game schedule, which is not easy. Pac-12 plays 9, other conferences play 8. It really makes a difference playing that 9th game. It's a tougher road to win the conference championship. So I love the fact personally that it is about conference results because that is the dispute which the conference should have control over, or what you do within those parameters should determine whether you advance to the conference championship game as the conference's champion, into the Rose Bowl, into the playoff. So I personally really like that particular point.
Man, you did an excellent job of explaining all that and your viewpoint on that. I wasn't quite as measured the other day when we received a call and there was a back and forth concerning conference standings and how a conference should determine its champion. And I was pulling my hair out saying, why would I, as a sovereign conference and conference commissioner, be looking to a committee or a BCS formula to determine what goes on in my conference?
In my backyard.
Yes.
Yes. Completely agree. Yep. Yeah. I mean, like the idea that ESPN is influencing, how your team, your champion, your representative will be decided. Yeah. Why cede that leverage? Why cede that authority? Let's just say, hey, if we're a good conference, if we're a big boy conference, then how we perform in our conference is the measuring stick. So like it also just sends a message of we can stand on our own. We don't need others to tell us how to think or how to go about it. Our conference is sufficient as a measuring stick. Completely agree.
USC fan Tim, we appreciate the contribution. Thank you so much for that. Let's get Lowell and Addison and call it a day. Thanks for the show,
of course,
Matt.
Addison is now down to Texas and USC, so he has eliminated Alabama. So like that's new since we last talked on the Voice of College Football.
I'm going to make a statement based on what I'm seeing in the chat, and then Matt, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that people are taking their shots at the Pac-12 and continue to poke fun at the Pac-12, and I get it. It is, at least by my metrics, the worst conference right now.
It is.
Nothing can be done about what happened in the past. Kliavkoff is dealing with where do we stand right now and what can we do to improve the situation and be forward thinking about setting ourselves up to succeed in the future. That's all that can be done right now.
Yeah, like is George Kliavkoff responsible for 2021 or for previous years? Like he inherited a mess. Like, and so he has to clean it up, and he couldn't do everything at once, right? Like he has all these things to worry about. I mean, let's just briefly look at, what Kliavkoff has had to do in his first year on the job. And again, he hasn't even been on the job 12 months. He took over July 1st of last year. So yeah, he's not even at 11 months. He's at 10 and a half. I mean, he had to deal with, the conference headquarters getting out of San Francisco, stop paying the exorbitant rent, pass the cost savings on to all the member institutions. He had to establish a rapport with all the presidents, chancellors, athletic directors. I mean, and this is not about like photo ops or, major meetings or media days. No, that means he has to travel to each school, have a one-to-one with leadership at each of those member institutions. He also has to figure out the media rights landscape. And of course, when Texas and Oklahoma went to the SEC, like what that necessarily involved a lot of his time in terms of reading the chessboard. What's our next move? How strategically positioned we are, all those kinds of questions. So he's had a lot on his plate. And so, he has to fix football officiating in the Pac-12 conference. I mean, on and on and on and on. You're not going to fix all this in 1 year. I mean, this is his first actual full football off season. He came in the middle of the off season last year. Now, this is his first full off season. So it's kind of like a coach. It's kind of like Lincoln Riley with recruiting. Like, you need a full cycle to build up the depth and really assemble everything in alignment the way you need it to be. So Kliavkoff, he's had a million different things to do. The idea that he is somehow attached to the Pac-12's legacy of failure, that's ridiculous. And we have to realize that Larry Scott just made everything awful and less manageable, less workable, and Kliavkoff is having to undo this mess. And just for people who don't follow the Pac-12 day to day the way I do, the administrators, the athletic directors, presidents, chancellors, they love George Kliavkoff. And it's not just a USC thing, even though Kliavkoff is clearly showing that he really takes it seriously, that USC needs to be put in the best position to succeed. It's throughout the conference, all 12 schools, the administrators, and all the localities throughout the Pac-12. They love George Kliavkoff. They see him as a guy with great people skills. They see him as a guy who's uniting the various factions and interests in the conference, bringing people together, low-key style, but forceful and firm with his decisions. He's listening to everyone in the room. He's gathering information, and then he acts on it. And he's doing it also with an eye toward, as I mentioned earlier, cost savings. Like, he's already saved millions and millions in rent. He's not firing Pac-12 network employees the way Larry Scott did. I mean, he is just looking out for everybody, and not just the people at the top, but people at the bottom and the middle tiers of the conference and its network, and the people who work on television and broadcasting. He's doing it all. So, Larry Scott left a lot of black marks during his tenure. George Kliavkoff is one by one correcting the various errors that Larry Scott made. People need to know that.
We have some tried and true Pac-12 fans that watch us on a regular basis that represent not just USC, not just Oregon, but on down the line, Washington State fans, Oregon State fans, Colorado fans that jump into our live streams on a regular basis. So we know that there are ardent Pac-12 supporters out there. My question is, and this is by extension what's brought up in the chat consistently, is there enough Pac-12 football fans, and B, enough support, conviction by the schools themselves to play big boy football to compete with the rest of the country?
I think there is. I mean, a simplified answer, but let's expound on that. Washington, figured it out under Chris Peterson and was really dealt a blow by the fact that Peterson chose to step down. And we all know that Peterson's a different kind of cat, doesn't go by the same rhythms that everyone else does. Like, he values quality of life. I mean, that's why he stayed at Boise as long as he did. But when he was there in Seattle, that program was rocking. And we've seen Stanford under Harbaugh, and then the early years of David Shaw, that program was, legitimate, tough, formidable program on a national scale. We've seen Oregon in its various iterations, and now poised to come back under Dan Lanning. But, Chip Kelly, Mike Bellotti, Mario Cristobal won a Rose Bowl there, and that program certainly has a loyal fan base. Utah, being able to get to the Rose Bowl, play a fantastic game against Ohio State. So there are several examples of programs that are doing it right. And with the other programs, think about UCLA in particular. If UCLA gets the right coach, and Chip Kelly, for whatever reason, lost the mustard on his fastball, just what isn't the same guy that he was 10 years earlier. That happens. Like he's now a little bit behind the curve. But if UCLA can get the right coach, that program is going to be extremely successful the way it was under Terry Donahue and then briefly under Bob Toledo in the late 1990s. And Arizona State is that sleeping giant. We saw Jake the Snake Plummer in 1996 coming within an eyelash of the national championship. Ohio State winning that Rose Bowl in the final minute. So Arizona State has the resources, the weather, the recruiting tools to be great, but you're seeing that program being mismanaged. But my larger point, Mark, is that if you get the right coach, if you get the right administrators, if you get the right formula at a number of Pac-12 schools, not just USC, not just Oregon, not just Washington, these programs can, in fact, succeed. The resources, the material is there, but you do have a number of administrative situations and coaching situations that need to be cleaned up. Like UCLA made a huge error, in my estimation, in not firing Chip Kelly. That UCLA basically saying that going 8-4, not winning the division during the Clay Helton era, saying that that's acceptable. That does not send a message that you're serious about success. But if UCLA ever gets to a point where it has the right coach, it has more administrative force and clarity in terms of valuing football. I mean, if you get those various ingredients right, if you get all the components properly arranged, various Pac-12 programs are in a position to do really well. You're just not seeing it, and it's just something which needs to happen. And George Kliavkoff is going to, I think, nudge these schools, nudge these athletic directors and presidents, and saying, hey, we need to pick up the pace. Like, you need to be better. You need to have a better roadmap for your program. I mean, he's not going to read them the riot act, but decisions like this to change the format of the Pac-12 championship game. And having said that, now conference programs have to measure themselves against everyone, not just in their own division. Like, that itself is a message, not sent in words, but sent in action that, hey, we're raising the bar here in the Pac-12. You have to keep up. So George Kliavkoff is already taking steps to create a culture where these slumbering, underachieving Pac-12 programs are being told, you have to be better. And so hopefully in the course of time, they will. And if that happens, this conference can be really special, because it's had moments when it was at the top of the college football world. I mean, the Oregon-Stanford rivalry, which we mentioned earlier, that was big boy football. That was appointment television, Harbaugh, Kelly, then David Shaw against Kelly, riveting games, very significant games. And in earlier years, you had Terry Donahue against Don James. Also, some great USC teams from the late 1980s. Washington beating Oklahoma in the 1985 Orange Bowl to be right there with BYU for the national championship. Washington winning the 1992 Rose Bowl against Michigan. We all wanted that Washington-Miami showdown for the whole enchilada. But we've seen Pac-12 teams in past years, in past decades, be right at the top of the sport. So there's no doubt in my mind that the material is there. The potential is there. You just got to get these situations properly aligned.
Because, Matt, as it stands right now, to play off of the comment made by DeReal MVP here, the Pac-12 needs to worry about being able to beat the Mountain West in bowl games, is that the Pac-12 got shut out this season and last season in bowl games. I don't know what the total tally is. It's 0-8 or something.
Yeah.
And, that's a collection of games. I think it is accurate, but it's only 8 or 9 games. But beyond that, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but we run our numbers comparison on all the conferences after the season. The Pac-12, I think, was 3-16 against the Power 5 and only 7-6 against the Group of 5. Is this the worst that the Pac-12 has ever been?
It's pretty close. I mean, in Pac-12 football, I have not had any reservations in saying it. Pac-12 football in 2021 was bad. It was not a quality product. And I don't say that as a USC blogger and website editor, even though the Trojans had a miserable season. But look around the conference, and quarterback play really was one of the defining aspects of the 2021 Pac-12 season. That you had Oregon saddled with Anthony Brown and just got kicked to the curb, thrown around like a rag doll twice against Utah. So in past years, you would have had Stanford and Oregon trading punches in these great epic battles. In 2021, you had, the biggest Pac-12 game of the year was Oregon-Utah, and it was nolo contendere for the Latin scholars out there. No contest twice. Utah just putting Oregon to bed by halftime. And then, the other conference programs, didn't have answers at quarterback either. You look at Cal, you look at Oregon State, which had a great running game, but didn't have the passing game to work off that running game. Arizona was a mess. Colorado was a mess, on and on and on. And so, the Pac-12's product, was, pretty dreary last year. And so it's attached to a number of schools, UCLA and Arizona State in particular, just not taking football success very seriously. Let's remind everyone on the Voice of College Football that Herm Edwards is running a wayward ship. You had Antonio Pierce, reprimanded. You had a bunch of coaches pushed out because of the COVID recruiting scandal. And so, like in any normal, sane situation, like the coach and the AD who presided over that mess should have been gonzo. And yet Arizona State President Michael Crow still hasn't seen fit to fire them. And you have that NCAA penalty looming, like a decision one would think is going to come down later in the off season, maybe late spring or early summer. And so when you have administrative incompetence allowing just a complete disaster to unfold, and we've seen ASU hemorrhage personnel into the transfer portal, USC scooped up Eric Gentry. We've had listeners and viewers here on the Voice of College Football mention Jermaine Lowell a number of times, and then recruiting has cratered. When you have, a nobody minding the store type situation, as we do here in Tempe, that's how, the Pac-12 is going to continue to suffer. It's going to continue to stay at the bottom of the power conferences. So a big part of this mix is getting schools that are going to be much more serious about valuing football success and athletic success. Certainly Arizona State and also UCLA, they have shown they're not really very serious right now, and that's a problem.
So, Matt, since you did make the statement that any one conference should have sovereignty and control of its own conference in determining who the champion is, do you think that it's good or not so good, or doesn't matter whether college football is on one page when it comes to each conference determining its own champion by its own division format? Do you think that there should be uniformity in regards to number of conference games, the format that determines a champion in each conference, all of those things, because we're trying to determine on the same scale who should be in a playoff? Or do you think that it's almost like the American League versus the National League, the DH or the not DH? Some people want uniformity. Other people say, hey, we want to see a little flair, want to see a little spice and uniqueness to the game.
Yeah, and so if we view college football as the regional sport it is, where in the 1980s, you'd see people throw sugar cubes on the field when the SEC champion was crowned. They'd throw oranges on the field when the Big 8 champion was crowned. If we view college football as the regional sport it is, and we value these local, unique traditions, then each conference should have its own say. I think the one thing where there should be uniformity, though, is the number of games you play within and outside your conference. I mean, because, for Alabama gets to play an FCS cupcake right before its rivalry game, and it gets to play another breather game, and you can really stack and arrange your schedule in a very favorable way when you get 4 bites at the apple in non-conference play, and having only 3, that one game is a really big competitive difference. To the extent that you're trying to determine a national champion in a national playoff field, that's the one area in my mind where there ought to be uniformity. Everyone play 8 or everyone play 9, doesn't matter. That's the one thing that should be unified. But everything else is a little bit more cosmetic, and I don't think it's absolutely essential. A parallel, just to educate people about a different part of the sports world, there's been a debate in tennis about the final set tiebreaker and how you solve that particular part of a major tournament tennis match. So you had the Australian Open having a 10-point final set tiebreaker. French Open would have no tiebreaker. Wimbledon would have a tiebreaker at 12-12 in the final set, whereas the other tournaments have it at 6-6. And the U.S. Open has the traditional, just the tiebreaker at 6-6. So those four major tournaments, they've had four different ways of resolving, when you get to overtime, essentially 6-6 in the final set, four different ways of deciding that. So I like the differentiation. I like the regional uniqueness and individuality, except for we should all have teams playing either 9 conference games or 8. That's the one thing that should be unified in my mind.
If I'm not mistaken, for years and years and years, all the other majors only needed 7 points in the tiebreaker, but you had to win by 2 in the tiebreaker. In Wimbledon, you could go on forever. So wasn't there that match at Wimbledon like 7 or 8 years ago that went to like 124 to
70 to 68 in the fifth set?
Yeah.
And there was a Wimbledon semifinal that went 26-24 in the fifth set. And that's what created the need to say, hey, at 12-12 in the final set, we need to have a tiebreaker. But the U.S. Open was on an island for decades as being the only one to have a fifth set or final set tiebreaker in a major tournament final. The other 3 didn't. But as you saw some of these extended fifth sets, then the movement for the tiebreaker at those other 3 majors emerged in recent years.
Yes, I was working at the Worldwide Leader at the time, and we were carrying that on our international networks, and may have been carrying it domestically too at that point. I don't remember, but yeah, I left and came back the next day, and they were still playing. Yes, it was something else. Good stuff. It's intriguing that the Pac-12 has two pretty sizable matchups against the SEC to start the season, where Oregon travels to Atlanta to take on Georgia and Utah going to Florida to take on the Florida Gators. These are games that, again, aside from the Oregon conquest in Columbus last year, have been losses for the Pac-12 in recent years. Auburn over Washington and Oregon and some other matchups that haven't gone well for the Pac-12. The Pac-12 could, of course, make a statement early in the season.
It certainly could. And the fact that you have Dan Lanning of Oregon going against his former boss, Kirby Smart, and Georgia right off helping Kirby win Georgia's first national title in 41 years. Like that's, the two best games in week 1 are Oregon, Georgia, and Notre Dame, Ohio State. Like those 2 are several notches above all the rest. And so the platform and the visibility that Oregon's going to have in that game against Georgia means that if the Ducks are somehow able to pull off the upset there, you thought the win over Ohio State was big last year. No, a win over Georgia. If Dan Lanning can pull that off at the beginning of his tenure, wow, that would be a complete catapult. And of course, the opposite part of that is that if Oregon gets clobbered by 30, well, then you really have the air let out of the balloon. But if you're in the Pac-12, if you're at Oregon, if you're at USC, your attitude should be, hey, we intend to be the best. And George Kliavkoff, just to kind of bring this full circle again, he's sending a message we don't want mediocre division champions in our conference championship game. We want only the best. And it's a pro USC message, yes, but it's also just a pro excellence message. It's a message saying we only want the highest standards around here. And it's just amazing to contemplate after the reign of error that was Larry Scott, that we now have a conference commissioner that fully gets it. And moreover, not just gets it, but isn't waiting to wait or, kind of go by formalities. No, he went right for the conference title game reform as soon as he could implement it. Why wait a year? Let's just do it. That is the proactive leadership that people out here in Pac-12 country have been thirsting for. And it feels really good going down our throat.
Nate is asking about what if 2 teams tie for second place but did not play each other in the regular season. It's similar to a 3-way tie for a division championship. Now there's a series of tiebreakers, and they're typically pretty standard in regards to common opponents starting
Common
there.
opponents, and I would imagine that the within conference opponents, that if you beat one of the two teams in the conference championship game, or the higher place teams in the conference, like if you beat the second place team in the conference and the team that you're tied with beat the fourth best team, then you would go, since you beat the higher place team. I would assume that, like, they haven't published those tiebreakers, but yeah, that would almost certainly be the basis of a tiebreaker, because again, the Pac-12 isn't relying on college football playoff rankings or outside national measurements. It's just about conference results. So you can split up the conference results in various ways to get a hierarchy of tiebreakers that resolve the dispute.
There's a couple comments being made in the live chat about attendance at USC games, and we talked about this a few weeks ago. Not you and I, but on one of our shows. Do you get a feel for right now what attendance could look like? So we had, of course, the USC of old, and then the USC of the Pete Carroll era, where I can't quickly recollect exactly what the attendance was, in a Coliseum that was seating about 92,000 at the time. Now we're back around 71,000, 78. And are there early indicators that the Coliseum will look more like the rocking Coliseum of 2005 than the mausoleum of 2021?
Yeah, I mean, so week one against Rice, just how desperate will fans be to go to that game? I don't know, but certainly week three, the home game against Fresno State, and every USC fan who is at least 30 years old remembers Reggie Bush in 2005 with that cutback run, which was very reminiscent of O.J. Simpson's iconic cutback run against UCLA in 1967. Bush carved out a path which was just strikingly similar to OJ 4 decades earlier. So Fresno State and people, Fresno State beat UCLA 1 year ago in Pasadena. So the house is going to be full for that game for sure. And then after we get through Fresno State, then it would depend on the weekly conference results. So if USC loses to Oregon State, you might take a little bit of the air out of the balloon in terms of the excitement surrounding the season, and maybe you'll get like 5,000-6,000 empties for the next home games before the road trip to Utah in mid-October. But if USC smokes Fresno State and handles Oregon State, enters October unbeaten, you're getting full house attendance the rest of the season, no doubt in my mind. I mean, let's also remember that lots of USC fans, and I love USC fans for doing this, like they stayed away at the beginning of the season for that Stanford game, for instance, when Stanford dump trucked USC and Clay Helton then got fired. USC fans were staying away because they wanted to put pressure on Mike Bohn and also President Carol Folt. Like, we're not going to donate our dollars to you until this problem gets fixed. And so that political pressure, that economic pressure, was effective. It sent the message. Mike Bohn acted after week 2. And like George Kliavkoff, he didn't wait. He acted firmly as early as he could. And, the results have been spectacular for USC since then. So USC fans withheld their dollars as long as Clay Helton was still coach. So the flip side is, now that Mike Bohn and Carol Folt have earned the trust of the fan base, they are going to show up, zero doubt in my mind.
Matt Simek, Trojans Wire, get on over there. Check out his work. Matt joins us each Tuesday. So we just started this a couple of weeks ago. USC Live every Tuesday at 1 Pacific time. So get there. And for you folks on the East Coast that cannot do the conversion, that's 4 Eastern time. People have trouble with the conversions of time zones. There's no doubt about that. Matt, what would be a realistic expectation of Pac-12 football this fall? What would paint us out a scenario that would be a step in the right direction? That's not totally insane, like they win every out-of-conference game and win the national championship. Something reasonable.
So number one, USC and Utah both have at least 10 wins going into the Pac-12 championship game. Number two, if Washington State plays Central Michigan in a bowl game, Washington State wins instead of losing. Let's just start there. All right. Let's just modest goals out here in the Pac-12.
I like that one. There you go.
Don't lose to a MAC team in a freaking bowl game, people.
That is tremendous, especially a MAC team that wasn't supposed to be in the bowl.
Exactly. Yeah, Washington State, as we say out here in the Pac-12, Washington State was Cougan it. That's what we call it. They were Cougan it.
Oh, that is tremendous.
Don't be someone who is Cougan it.
That is tremendous. All right, Matt, I think we've done quite a bit of damage here, unless you have anything else you'd like to go over concerning the Pac-12 and USC. It's been a good time.
Just one other little tidbit that I didn't get to, and that is that, precisely because I think the Oregon State game now really is going to be the determinant of whether USC makes the Pac-12 title game or not, because USC might lose to Utah, but if it beats Oregon State, I still think the Trojans are going to go 8-1. You're going to have the scenario where Oregon fans are going to be rooting very hard for Oregon State in that Week 4 game, now that USC and Oregon are more directly in a battle to face Utah, most likely, for the Pac-12 title. So Ducks are going to be wearing black and orange in Week 4 in Corvallis. That's going to be a new plot twist.
Yes, for the higher level fan, there's going to be more thinking regarding rooting interests now. Yes, absolutely. Matt, we appreciate it so much. Is there anything in particular you would like folks to check out?
Well, we're just going to cover this huge story. And it's like Christmas here at Trojans Wire, that the odds of us being able to cover a Pac-12 championship game, which of course is good for the family business, and our website just went up. So our website is now in a position to get more page views, more publicity. So we're going to be covering all the little offshoots and implications of this story, because there's nothing else to cover. We're waiting for the Jordan Addison decision between USC and Steve Sarkisian at Texas, so we'll cover that when it happens. But right now, we're just going to break this story into all of its different parts. That's going to be coming up over the next several days.
Our next show, folks, is Miami Live Thursday night at 8:00 Eastern time, and then I'll be on here taking your calls late night on Thursday. Matt, I appreciate you jumping online with us and clarifying things for it. It's been a great conversation, and thanks for breaking things down.
And I appreciate you having me on short notice. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. We will see you on Thursday night.